Hey, and welcome back to another Skag Academy video lesson. We're now going to begin going over the distribution schematics and case studies. If you remember from earlier lessons, distribution is when supply starts to overtake demand, which will ultimately lead us to a markdown phase. With that being said, when we expect a markdown, we are looking for sell side type action, right? So if you're looking at taking options trades, futures trades, margin leverage, we're looking at that sell side action. And if you're looking at investments, longer term stuff, you're going to be looking at the act of maybe getting the best price for your assets as you can before it decreases, or just knowing that you're going to be expected to hold those investments without a further going return for some time. So let's take a look at this. This is distribution schematic number 1. This is where our focus will be for this case study. If you take a look at this, it looks very similar to accumulation schematic number 1, except it's just flipped upside down. There are a few different characteristics here that we want to pay attention to, mostly being those SOWs, those signs of weaknesses, which we'll kind of break down in the case study. But aside from that, they are very similar in the sense that they are the inverse of each other. So let's jump right onto the chart here. We're going to look at Bitcoin USD on a 4-hour time frame, monitoring a distribution schematic number 1. So if we take a look at this, we do see some accumulation down here. We do have our markup, so we know we're in the appropriate kind of market cycle for something to potentially start happening. Doesn't mean it always will, right? As you can see, it's been marking up for quite some time. So let's take a look at this. We'll let this play out. It's a little fast. I'm so sorry. But taking a look at this as we let price develop there in that quick second, there's a few things that began to pop up on our chart. One, it's this supply and demand kind of battle here. Immediately a lot of buying action came in, but it was also immediately absorbed. There was also a lot of selling action immediately after that time frame, so a little bit battle of supply and demand there. And then from that point, we actually started moving higher in terms of price. But if you start to notice, the effort here begins to decrease, right? This alone is not a sign of anything. We do need some further going details there, much like here, even though it was a big effort from the buyers and then diminishing after, it did still trend for some time. So let's take a look at what happens shortly after this. All right, we have another push up again, this time on more volume than we saw previously, but still less than this kind of supply and demand battle here. So we start to see these kind of high efforts to bring price above this, but it is ultimately lacking in that effort. Now we start to get some corrective moves to the downside, immediately erasing and breaking that structure. No real, alarming effort here from the sellers though. But as price kind of starts to settle out, we start to see even more levels of structure being broken, right? Starting to pull back. The effort is remaining kind of consistent from the sell side, but we're just observing. We don't see anything too alarming just yet. All right, price starts to form some lower time frame support areas that continue to hold. Start to get some reactions off of that. Let's see what happens the next time we come down. So the next time we come down, we actually start to, once again, breaking structure. And then now again, doing so with inclining or raising sell effort. So now we want to kind of just pause here for a second, right? As this candle is developing, this is a 4-hour time frame, so you do have some time to kind of sit here and think. Right, we see a lot of things happening. We see the effort to the buy side starting to slow down. We start to see some market structure breaks, right? We see, this move that got erased and then retested. Now we see this structure, which is also getting broken, and then now we're, trading underneath it on some higher sell side action. We start to ask ourselves, are these like the early signs that maybe we're going to be range bound? Maybe something's going to happen up here. Maybe we just need to spend more time, working out this supply and demand shift that maybe started to happen. So we start to ask ourselves, maybe this is a phase A environment. Or maybe this is a phase A environment. Maybe what we're looking at here is a buying climax because it's the highest point on the chart, and we're also doing this on price action to volume divergence, right? This is going to be our AR because this is automatically where we kind of came back down and retested, right? Established the new range. This is the ST, which is just the bounce from that area. We also have some old areas of, resistance as well. And then now we start to see this first SOW, right? This first sign of weakness. We start to break structure. We start to see some higher effort. We actually kind of say at this point, if we hold here, it's possible that we start to work out maybe a phase B, right? Maybe we start to do a downtrending trading range. There's a few different possibilities here. So we just kind of want to mark out our range because we start to notice some, potential shifts in supply and demand, at least at this point. I'm sorry, let's actually use both for this. So we'll use the AR and then the sign of weakness down there. You can also mark out your ST, which is more or less the middle of the range. Right, and we just want to start monitoring what happens at these price points. We want to see if sellers stay committed at this lower level, if the buyers remain uncommitted at the top, and if that remains true, right, where can we start taking, our opportunity, taking advantage of what we see, and how can we play that? So we'll let this play out. We do know that at this point, we do suspect a potential phase B coming in. We get another hard push that's immediately rejected from that area, right? Starts to show us potential maybe absorption. That also happens in a very interesting spot, right? You do also have like potentially, this OB. You could also probably refine this in a lower time frame. So there is a lot of liquidity and demand down here, right? That immediately gets absorbed. That lets us know maybe the sellers aren't so committed right now, and we need some premium pricing to come in. Or we'll see if the buyers will actually run with this demand, and if they do so, start showing some strength again, will we continue? But ultimately, what we suspect here now is just a range to form, and we're going to monitor what happens here and here. And then based off that, we will have our final judgment. So we let this play out. We do expect phase B to kind of be super annoying, as it always is, right? Super choppy. We start to see, again, support liquidity starts to form down here. No real commitment from the sellers, no real follow through from the buyers just quite yet. So we let things play out as it battles around. Let's just change this up real quick, move this over. Now we start to see that price has kind of broken out of the phase B nonsense that it's had going on, and it's actually starting to test the buying climax. So again, we want to see where the commitment of the effort lies. And if we take a look, this is some really smooth price action. Looks like it's going to just break right out of this. But if we notice, again, the effort isn't, there at all, right? There's not really any point in the range where it had lower effort going into a, resistance. I mean, granted, it's never traded up here before, but the effort here is even smaller than what we were doing over here with the original buying climax. That lets us know maybe we should stop, chasing this if we are in some sort of setup that we saw in a smaller time frame. And let's kind of wait and see how price reacts, right? Because at this point, we are trading at the extremes of the range. We immediately see it kind of start to fade off. There is no giant commitment from the sellers just yet, so you don't want to be jumping into this saying, oh, well, we're coming back into the range, let's just jump to the sell side. We don't really have any sort of full commitment yet, so we'll let price kind of play out. All right, we can again see that price goes up, immediately tests up. No real buying activity happening, right? Kind of the same volume that we saw previously. But now we're starting to get really harsh rejections to the downside. We're immediately erasing this move, showing that there is seller interest up there. Now we get this secondary candle, and look at the sell volume, right? Look at the effort. The bulls just have no effort behind their moves, and now there is, premium smart money coming in and saying, I will take this pricing as an opportunity to get out of my positions. And at this point, we have to start asking ourselves, okay, this looks very phase C-ish, right? We have these attempts up, smooth attempts up from the buyers. They're not committed. And from that, we're getting a big commitment from the sellers. So we start to look at this from the aspect of, okay, this could be our UTAD/test. This is one of those scenarios where the test, if you do want to say that, the entire thing is a UTAD, that's cool too. This is technically your UTAD, and this is a test which actually wiped the liquidity of the UTAD, which some people would tell you is not supposed to happen, but there are obviously cases where it does happen, right? That's why we're using this actual setup. So the main takeaway here again is the effort to the buyers and sellers at a critical point after supply and demand has already worked itself out. We see the declining effort from the buyers. We see the intent of the sellers increasing both on structural breaks previously and then now at premium pricing. And we have to say to ourselves, okay, at this point, I believe this is the high. We're going to start looking to scale into sells, maybe protect our capital, maybe start taking sell positions, whatever that money management looks like for you, and we'll start targeting the downside. So we do want to look anywhere, following a few of our logics, whether you want to try applying the order block. This isn't technically speaking valid because it's not an engulfing candle, but it did close very hard down, right? So anywhere around that price action is great. You could also wait for lower time frame price action to form and then execute off of that, right? But the main idea is now that phase C is looking to come to an end, that we want to make our final adjustments before we break out to the downside. So let's see how this plays out here. All right, price starts to work itself out, starts to form some lower time frame liquidity above here. Right, so if you're watching it on a lower time frame, you might take note of that. Continuous buildup of liquidity, starts to grab liquidity. At this point, price starts to move to the downside, start to see that continued effort come in. And at this point, you're looking at this and you're probably came to the conclusion this is your LPSY. And with your last point of supply, you can now gauge your targets, right, using the top breakout to the LPSY. We're looking at 55.3, right? So looking at 55.3 for potential area to take profit. We'll just let price kind of work itself out. So you can see it comes down, plays into that 161.8 zone. But because this is a higher time frame distribution, it is likely to continue playing out. You have, last points of supply. Again, these are just smaller cycles as a redistribution inside of the main cycle. But you'll see back on the schematic that we are actually known to expect this down at the sign of weaknesses. This creates a new sign of weakness over here. And we're going to just continue playing that to the downside. At this point, it becomes more obvious to everybody what's really happening, right? You want to start making your adjustments again up in that phase C, phase D. So at this point, we're entering late phase D into phase E, which is we know is the get paid phase, the money phase, the one that really breaks out to the downside phase like that. And it will be far too late for you to enter your trades, right? And that wraps up that distribution. Main part being is after we see that phase C, phase D, we're in this with the expected push to the downside. Now, that does complete distribution schematic number 1. Quick little case study. Now, I do want to compare this over to the schematic I showed you guys at the beginning of the lesson, right over here, because there are a few different things happening, right? If you see the distribution on Bitcoin here, what's notably absent is this phase B UT, right? This phase B kind of upthrust, this retest to the buying climax. Now, this isn't always going to happen, right? We only had that one strong push with the volume that we saw, right? The reasons that we entered on phase C in that area. But if you did get a UT, a phase B UT, then again, you would have seen declining volume up into this. But the reason I wanted to use this as a schematic case study is just because the schematic says that there has to be a UT doesn't necessarily make that true, right? The structure of this is not always going to be 150% on point, right? It's the volume, it's the way it reacts at the highs and lows that give you those early signs of weakness, and then that final confirmation if you're going to get in for that phase D, phase E move. And then again, you could see the LPSY here with the sign of weakness, how we always expect that to kind of do a smaller cycle before continuing its main move, which you can see in this case was dragged out pretty long. But I wanted to use this as the case study today because, again, not every schematic is going to be perfect in terms of structure. Again, it's that structure versus effort divergence that we look for that really confirms the schematics. So that being said, distribution schematic number 1, This is the first case study for this. We'll see if we can find more in the future for some bonus lessons. If there's any questions, comments, concerns, as always, you guys can put them below, throw them in the Discord, the chats, wherever we are connected, and I will see you guys in the next lesson.